Well, again, our training today is brought to you by our partners at Monterey County Works. And today we're so happy to be joined by Laura Kirschner, the business services specialist there, who is going to share more about the resources available to employers like yourself. Good
Good,
morning, Laura.
good morning. Good morning, Anna. And ladies, thank you so much. We're so delighted to always partner with CEA to make these webinars available to our local community and the workforce community across California. Thank you so much. I want to draw your attention to the screen now and just chat briefly about some of the offerings we have here at Monterey County Works and our business services department. We've got recruitments that you can be a part of as far as our job fairs, our specialized recruitments. We've got some job boards and other promotional activities that we have available to you. We can post jobs to our job board or to CalJobs at no cost. We ask that you remember that. Log on to our website, MontereyCountyWorks.com, MontereyCountyWorks.com to learn more about our recruitment offerings for our business community. We've also got on-the-job training as well as incumbent worker training available for our local employers. On-the-job training, we can reimburse you at 50% of an individual's wage for up to 3 months. So that can be up to $8,000 reimbursement for our local Monterey County employers. Ask that you remember that. And then some other resources available to you. There is a 1-800 number hotline, resources and referrals for business solutions. And that is some new things available to our employers through our employer hiring videos, our workforce minutes. It's just some other things that we wanted to be sure and draw your attention to. You'll find that on MontereyCountyWorks.com. If you happen to be going the other way and you're downsizing, please remember to tell us ahead of time. We're part of the County of Monterey, especially if you've got 50 or more people. We do need to know that. You can do that through EDD on our rapid response information on the website there, or again, log on to our website to learn more. I think that's about us. That's about it for us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to the webinar today.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura, for everything you and your team do for employers in your county. So now I'd love to introduce, our trainer today. We have Juliana Gabriel, our Senior HR Compliance Director. So you are in wonderful hands. Good morning, Juliana.
Good morning, Anna. Thank you. And thank you, Laura and Monterey County Works for sponsoring this event today. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about California Employers Association, or CEA. We are an HR consulting company, and we have members located all throughout the state of California and well beyond California. And our goal is to provide employers peace of mind through exceptional HR compliance solutions, training, and coaching services. So we do support Monterey County Works with that HR hotline. So when you are calling in, you're getting a live HR advisor from CEA. And if you find that you need some additional support beyond that HR hotline that's provided to you by Monterey County, you can join us as a CEA member and get access to our extensive library of resources. So for example, all of our members get access to hundreds of HR forms and sample policies and toolkits. And you know that we're constantly keeping those up to date with all of California's changing requirements. We can also help you out with projects. So whether you need a customized employee handbook, maybe you'd like us to come out and do some training for your staff, or assist you with other consultation work, we can support you. So you can learn more about us at our website, employers.org, or you can also call into us directly with any questions that you might have. Now, I do want to remind you that this presentation today is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal advice. So if you do have an issue of legal significance or a concern, make sure you do consult your own attorney about that. But that said, you're more than welcome to ask general questions about the content today or get clarification you need. So if you can go ahead and put those questions in the chat box, I will be monitoring that throughout the training and maybe even answering some of those questions live. But otherwise, you do have that HR hotline that is available to you Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. All right, so let's talk about what is on our agenda today. We are going to be covering what everybody is talking about right now in the world, and that is artificial intelligence. So we're going to kick off our discussion with this new AI era, as it's been coined, that we are all living in and adjusting to, and importantly, how we help our staff navigate through all of the changes that are happening around them. And as you start to adopt these new technologies, there might be hesitation or questions. So we're going to give you some tips for that. We're also going to talk about your California compliance obligations. So what laws or regulations are on the books right now for employers that you need to be aware of if you're using AI to help make employment decisions and hiring. And then we'll also talk about where California may be heading soon when it comes to AI regulation. We're going to have an interesting discussion on some of the potential pitfalls when using AI. So issues like bias and privacy issues, misinformation, fraud. So we're going to give you some tips for how you can train and work with your staff to avoid some of those risk areas or at least mitigate some of those issues. And then finally, we're going to round out our discussion with developing your AI handbook policy. So for most employers, we do recommend now that you have an AI handbook policy that just places some guardrails or parameters around using AI. And so we're going to give you some tips for how to put that together. So jumping right in here to this era of artificial intelligence, I want to talk about why it's been such an AI explosion or why it's felt that way in the past couple years. Because we've actually had this technology, these large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, and others. We've had that type of technology around for about a decade or so, arguably, but why it's felt like such a huge shift is it's recently become accessible to the masses, right? We now all have this technology at our fingertips. So just to put in perspective, it only took 5 days, less than a week, for ChatGPT to reach 1 million users. So ChatGPT is the most widely known and popular AI tool out there right now. They hold about 80% of the market share, so they're certainly the big fish. And just to put that in perspective, Facebook, a very popular social media platform, right? It took them 10 months to reach 1 million users. So the pace at which this technology is being accessed is just really like nothing we've ever seen before. Over 1 billion people are actively using AI tools today, and that's climbing. And then I also thought this was interesting. So 95% of Americans report that they're still using traditional search engines monthly, meaning if they have questions or research, they're still going over to Google or Bing, right, to look up that question. But now what's happening is 60%, over half of those Google searches are ending without a click to a website. And you might have noticed with these search engines now, they often populate an AI answer for you, right? So instead of going and clicking on the website or looking at the source for the information, people are looking at that AI answer and they're moving on. So it's really fundamentally changing how we are accessing and digesting information. Now, we recently did run a survey with our group of employers to see kind of what their level of AI use is right now. And so we wanted to share those results. This is kind of interesting. So in the survey that we ran with our employers, the largest category reported being an intermediate AI user and being interested in learning more. So they are using it, frequently for work, maybe on a weekly basis. They're comfortable with writing prompts and getting information, from the AI or using it to create documents and those kind of things. The next biggest category, though, was the AI beginner, right? There's plenty of employers that have only briefly explored AI-related business opportunities. Maybe they've used it a couple times, but then that's kind of really it. And then what was also really interesting, we have a pretty big percentage here that say they don't use AI and they don't have a desire to do so. And I think that's kind of in line with this national trend, this pushback that we're seeing on AI data centers and a concern about natural resources, right? And the environment. And then also there's a lot of concern around job displacement. There's been a lot of reports from these, tech companies that they're laying people off due to AI. And so I think those are some of the reasons for the pushback here. You'll have to decide for yourselves with your management team to what extent you want to use AI, how you might use that technology, and importantly, what guardrails or kind of safety nets you want to put around that. And that's what we're really going to be focusing on today. As part of that survey, we also asked for specific examples of how business leaders and HR professionals are using these AI tools right now. And by far, the most common were for research. So just Q&A, right? Kind of like your traditional Google, but they're going over to the AI now. And then also drafting communication. So drafting emails, letters, correspondence, right? And that's because oftentimes, you can use the AI if you put a specific enough prompt. It can write something for you in seconds and it can come out polished and sounding professional, right? So a lot of people are using it to cut down on time. Same thing with projects like drafting job descriptions, generating policies or checklists or to-do lists on their calendar. And that's because these large language models are really great at organizing and synthesizing information. So again, what may have taken, a couple hours, let's say, to draft a job description, now might take a few minutes, right? Another big category is screening candidates. So a lot of AI tools are being used right now to filter through resumes, to decide who moves forward. There are some additional risk areas that we're going to talk about, and California is really paying attention to that with a recent regulation that was adopted last year. So we're going to get in more to that in a little bit. Also, analyzing data across HR information systems. So using AI to generate reports on, how many accidents or near misses did we have, this year? What's our retention looking like, our attendance, right? Because it's really great at aggregating that kind of information. And then also marketing. So people are turning to AI to come up with marketing campaigns, social media graphics, those types of things, and cut down on some of the time needed there. I also wanted to give you just an overview of some of the common AI tools out there right now for those of us who are newer to this area. And if you want to include any others in the chat that you've been working with and your experience on, I think that would be helpful to learn from each other. But the big ones are, ChatGPT, of course, and also Google Gemini. So these are primarily conversational AI used for Q&A, research, creative writing, everything we just talked about. Claude is another really big competitor. I would say they get, a lot of attention also in addition to ChatGPT. And they have what's known as a larger context window. So they arguably have a bit of an edge when it comes to long form writing, document analysis, brief writing, and those types of things. Microsoft Copilot. This is AI that's built into existing Microsoft applications like Office and Teams, and it automates tasks within those systems. So that's the other thing we're seeing. Even if you want to avoid AI, it's going to become increasingly more difficult to do that because it's starting to be integrated with the other tools that we're using. Same thing with Canva. So Canva is a program that helps to design layouts and social graphics, content creation. And so there's the Canva AI feature that a lot of marketers really enjoy that implement AI features. And then finally, one I wanted to mention that's pretty interesting is OpenClaw. So this is actually an autonomous AI agent that can execute tasks on your behalf. So if you kind of imagine what a robot could do for you, right? Send emails, update spreadsheets, check items off your to-do list. The catch here, though, is that they have unfettered access to your system. So you certainly wouldn't want to probably download this on your work computer without authorization. And there's, increasingly questions around how much autonomy or responsibility do we want to give to an AI tool. It was in the news recently that OpenAI was working with a new AI model, and they asked it to come up with an answer or question, and they didn't realize that the AI escaped what was known as the sandbox. So it went out to the internet and it hacked another company known as Hugging Face to basically cheat on the test it was given. And OpenAI apparently didn't know about that until Hugging Face, publicized that issue, which would have been a crime if a human did it, right? So very interesting stuff happening out there right now. And again, we want to just be thoughtful as we start to adopt these new technologies and make sure that we have good processes in place to kind of reduce some of those issues. So now I'd like to hear from you all. How are most people reacting to the AI changes in your workplace? And I'm going to launch a poll here. And this is anonymous. Would you say that most of your staff right now are positive about AI? They're excited about some of the new opportunities and efficiencies. Is there a negative response? There's concerns about job loss or other issues. Are the reactions mixed? Or maybe you don't know. You haven't had any sort of discussion around that. So go ahead and share that, and then I will share our poll results with the audience. All right, so it looks like for the majority, or I guess about half, say they're excited about the new opportunities and efficiencies. So it's been a pretty good reaction to that, right? And then we have the rest, no negative here. The rest are mixed, or you haven't had discussions around it. So I think that that's pretty common that we're going to have mixed reactions when we have something that is bringing so much fundamental change, not only in our workplaces, right, but in our world. There's going to be a lot of mixed reactions to it. And even if you haven't had any employee identify that they're concerned about it or concerned about their job, chances are that you probably have some folks that have some hesitation around it. And I think that's in large part also to what a lot of the AI tech CEOs are kind of saying out there. They're making these lofty predictions that, for example, AI is going to eliminate 50% of all entry-level white-collar jobs, right? They kind of come out with these big predictions, and everyone's kind of left wondering, well, what is that real impact going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years, right? So as you start to explore kind of using these new technologies, some tips for navigating change with your staff who may have hesitation or concern around these issues. Number one, we would recommend that you kind of just acknowledge concerns openly. So if someone is sharing that, they don't like AI or they're worried about losing their job, you can say, I understand that the changes happening right now can feel overwhelming, but I want to communicate really transparently on this issue, right? And then be transparent about how you envision AI or new technologies being used, right? So if you really just envision that AI is going to be used to take over some of those more redundant tasks, right? Let's say you have a really tedious billing process and you think we could use this AI technology to automate some of that, right? You could explain that we're going to use it to augment support rather than replace jobs. That's our goal here. And we'd like to free you up for more strategic work or creative work, and then give them specific examples of how you envision that happening. That can start to kind of calm people down, right? If you do feel like there is a good chance that it could lead to some displacement or downsizing, consider, can you invest in training or upskilling for your staff, whether that's cross-department training or helping them get a new certification so that they see that they have a path forward either at your organization or, maybe eventually beyond your organization. And I should say, it's important that you don't make any promises or guarantees. So I wouldn't say something so explicit like we're never going to fire anybody or we're never going to downsize, right? Because we just don't know what's going to happen. But you can say our goal or our vision is that AI is going to be used to really support your role. And this is how we see that happen, right? And then as you start to adopt new technologies, involve staff in the decision-making processes, right? That is often the best way to get their buy-in and to help them feel like they're part of the process. And so say, where are our pain points? Where do we have work that's just very manual or it's slowing us down that we might be able to automate? And then we're going to want to maintain ongoing communication about workplace impact. So if you do see yourself in an industry where AI might be impacting you, whether it's we want to adopt a new technology or our competitors are using this technology, right? You're going to want to have open conversations with your staff about that. And then also check in, every few months on how things are going or if there's new opportunities that you might need to explore, right? It's not really a one and done conversation just because, again, things are moving and changing so rapidly. Some other tips that we have for you on leading and fostering change, and this is in general, not just limited to AI. We kind of have these 4 factors that we recommend that you're considering in a time of change or restructuring or disruption. So as we already talked about, involving, trusting, and empowering your employees, right? Giving them a job to do in this area, saying, hey, we want you to research, potential technology out there and what might be available for us in our process, especially if it's your, department heads. But also we really need to prioritize our manager development because in a time of change, a lot of employees are going to ask questions of their supervisors. They're going to want to know, how is this going to impact me or this department? And if their supervisors don't really know and they don't really have a good answer, or maybe they're giving inconsistent information, that's going to kind of spur people to be, more worried or more anxious. So, but if we, involve our managers in understanding the company's goals and how to answer some of those types of questions, then that's going to instill a lot more confidence, right? And then we also need to provide tools to navigate the changes. So if we are going to be adopting a new technology, for example, we want to make sure that we're providing training on how to do that and that we provide retraining. There's a statistic that, as humans, we need to hear something 7 times before it really sticks, right? And so if you give one training on a new process and then that's kind of it, they're probably going to forget a lot of that. And so if you can record it so that they can go back to it, or if you have standard operating procedures that they can refer to and say, okay, how is this process? How does billing work now, right? With this new technology, so they can go back and reference that. And then this is probably maybe the most important one, but also the most difficult, is creating a culture of creativity and learning. And that is really going to start at the top with your leadership. And you're really going to want to lean on those leaders that have a strength in influencing people, motivating people, building rapport, right? We have all different types of leaders. Some are more quiet and strategic. Others are kind of those motivators. And it's those folks that we really need to lean on in times of change. All right, so now that we focused on just kind of the disruption with AI and the quick changing impacts, let's talk about some of the compliance obligations. So the laws or regulations that are on the books right now for employers. And the first thing that I really want to point out is, even though California is one of the first states to really start taking a stab at regulating AI, there's really not a lot right now for employers. There's one regulation that I'm going to be talking about that went into effect last year, but there really aren't a ton of laws as of this point. And I think that's just because the legislature is kind of playing catch up, right? So they're just now also learning about the technology and the impacts. That said, I do think we're going to see a lot more this coming fall with a lot of the proposed bills right now involving AI, including for employers. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot more regulation. And that was recently signaled in an executive order by Governor Newsom, where he asked state departments to look into the impacts that AI is having right now on jobs and the economy. And he also proposed assessing whether there needs to be some type of Cal warn requirements, right? So advance notice for workers that are laid off due to AI. And I think that was in response to a lot of the big tech layoffs that we've seen recently at companies like Meta and Amazon and Oracle and these many other tech companies that are saying, you know, we're laying off due to efficiencies with AI. So we'll have to see where that goes. I would definitely stay tuned. I think this is going to be a big year with new laws for 2027. But right now, what we have in place for most employers that we need to be aware of is the California Civil Rights Department regulation that was issued last year in October 2025. And the focus of this regulation is really just on protecting employees and applicants from employment discrimination when employers use AI tools or what's known as an automated decision-making system to help make employment-related decisions. And the big example that I gave you was in hiring, right? That we're using these screening tools to decide, you know, which resumes we pull to move forward. And so there's a concern that these AI tools can be biased, right? That there's this, you know, automatic system, and maybe it disadvantages women or older workers or workers of a certain racial background, right? So that's really what the regulation is focused on at a high level. As I mentioned, it does protect applicants and employees, but not independent contractors. So it does not extend to 1099 workers. And really what it clarifies is that the employer is ultimately responsible if that AI tool discriminates, whether it was intentional or not, right? So basically, you're using AI at your own risk. You can't point the finger and say, well, we didn't know that it was biased as it, you know, was selecting these resumes. You, the employer, can be responsible for a discrimination claim if it's having a discriminatory impact. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this regulation. And I first just want to define what is an automated decision-making system, or ADS, because that's the term that our Civil Rights Department uses here. And that is defined as using any computational process that makes a decision or facilitates, meaning supports, helps your human decision involving an employment benefit that we're going to talk about in just a minute. And they give some examples of what an ADS could be. So artificial intelligence tools, like the ones we talked about, but also machine learning, statistics, or other data processing techniques. So the regulation is focused on all of those types of things. So for example, if you have a system where your customers can rate their experience with your employees, they can give them, 1 to 5 stars, or they can give it feedback. And then that system then ranks your employees or gives them a score. And then you use that to make some sort of employment related decision to decide, who should get the raise, or should I put this information in their performance review, right? That would be an automated decision-making system. And so if there's bias there, if there's a discriminatory impact there, you, the employer, can be responsible for that. So AI is just one type of an ADS. It falls under this larger ADS umbrella. Now, what the regulation clarifies, some of the key highlights. So it states that our Fair Employment and Housing Act, that's our California law that protects against harassment and discrimination, it applies when employers use AI tools or other ADS to assist them in making employment-related decisions involving any of the following. So the big one is hiring, like we talked about, right? So if you're an employer and you're using these resume screening tools, these AI algorithms, right, to help you filter through resumes. I've also recently seen that some employers are actually using AI avatars to conduct initial interviews. So if you can imagine someone's on the computer, it looks like they're, on a Zoom call with a person, but it's actually an AI bot that's asking the questions, right? And deciding whether that candidate moves forward. That's probably an interesting experience to go through, but that's another example, right? But not just hiring. So if you use the AI tool to help you decide who to promote, let's say you hop over to ChatGPT and you upload the performance reviews of your team and you say, who should I promote on my team? Or selecting employees for training programs or other opportunities, compensation, deciding how to compensate your employees if you use the AI tool or the ADS to help assist you with making that decision, who to terminate, right? So if you use the AI tool to help you decide who in a group of employees you should lay off, or maybe you go over to Claude, for example, and you give a list of policy violations and issues you've had with the employee, and you say, should I terminate this person, right? That is an AI tool that's assisting you in making an employment-related decision or any other term or condition of employment. Again, if it ends up discriminating or if there's a bias there, you, the employer, can be on the hook for that. Some other things that the regulation clarified, we need to be really careful if we're using any sort of computer-based tests, quizzes, games, or other assessments. And where I see this the most is in the hiring process with applicants. So if you use like an aptitude test or a skills test, right, where it's on the computer, you need to be really careful with those. We tend to advise against using those types of tests because oftentimes they're overbroad. And so if they end up having a discriminatory impact, you can be responsible unless you can really show that that test was job related and consistent with business necessity. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a computer test where the applicant has to answer questions. And one of the things that it's measuring is how quickly that applicant is answering the questions. And that's not really going to be related to their job. It's not like they're going to need to answer questions quickly. And this has the impact of filtering out, removing certain candidates with disabilities from the applicant pool. Maybe they have a learning disability, they're not able to type as quickly or digest the question as quickly. And so it's disadvantaging them, even if they're perfectly qualified to perform the job. That would be one example of how they could bring a discrimination claim. So you want to be really careful with those types of quizzes and assessments, especially in the hiring process. Another thing that the regulation clarifies is we cannot use AI tools to inquire into criminal history prior to a conditional offer of employment. And I think that's really to nobody's surprise. In California, we already have a law that says if you have 5 or more employees when you're hiring, you can't ask an applicant about their criminal history, their conviction history, or conduct a background check until after they have been extended a conditional employment offer. And so this is just basically saying you can't use these types of AI tools to get around that, right? You can't go over and hop over to ChatGPT and ask it to look up background, history, criminal history information on that applicant. And then finally, this one's really important, is the record retention requirement. So if you do use these AI tools, these ADS, to make employment-related decisions, you have to hold on to those records, those conversations with the AI tool, right? For 4 years from the date you created them or the personnel action you took, whichever comes later. So I would discuss with your management team, your HR team, whether you even want to put any sort of employment-related questions, should we discharge this person? Should we discipline this person? Into tools like ChatGPT, because arguably now you have to save those records and those records could potentially be used against you in a lawsuit. So you might decide, we're not going to use the AI tools for these employment-related purposes, right? So it's not saying you can't, but there's going to be some additional risks if you do so. So you might be wondering, does California require you to proactively look into whether these AI tools that you're using have a bias? Do you need to conduct anti-bias testing? And what our Civil Rights Department said on that They didn't give us an outright mandate, but they get about as close to it, I think, as you can. What they say is, let's say that you are sued for discrimination and you used an AI tool to, help decide, who you should hire. And if you were not anti-bias testing, that can be evidence used against you, right? They can say, well, you weren't doing your due diligence on that. And so maybe it is more likely that there was a bias there. On the flip side, if you are doing anti-bias testing, you could use that as relevant to your defense. You can say we made good faith efforts and we didn't conclude that there was any bias that was happening, right? So, of course, based on that, our recommendation would be if you are going to use these types of AI tools, and right now, the biggest area that I see is in hiring, right? You're going to want to incorporate anti-bias testing. And if you have your own internal AI tools that have been developed for you by a vendor, so it's not, these public tools like ChatGPT or Claude, it's internal, right? You're going to want to make sure that the guidelines are really clear with those vendors on what type of information they are assessing or gathering, right? So you're going to want to work closely with them on that. So what is anti-bias testing? Our Civil Rights Department does not provide us a specific definition, unfortunately, but some examples could include kind of on the front end, right, is auditing the screening tool questions or criteria. So what is that AI tool assessing? And is it job related, right? Are they looking at, for example, whether this person is a caretaker or they've had medical issues or those types of things, right, would be questions we wouldn't want in there. On the flip side, ongoing monitoring of how that AI tool is actually working. So having somebody go back and see, well, does it seem like there's resumes that were excluded from the applicant pool with really no good reason? Is it seeming to have some sort of discriminatory impact? And I know a lot of employers are using these tools to try to cut down on that human review time, right? And the number of resumes that we have to go through. But really, it's kind of the wild, wild west out there right now when it comes to these tools. And so you're going to want to have some level of human review so you don't put yourself in a sticky situation. And so, of course, this can kind of get nuanced and complex. So we would recommend working with legal counsel if you are using these types of tools right now. And I want to give you an example. This is not just stuff on paper. This is already leading to lawsuits in the real world. So we have this federal Mobley versus Workday case. And what was alleged here? There was this plaintiff, Mobley. He was a job applicant. And so he went over to Workday's hiring platform and he applied to a bunch of different jobs with different companies. But Workday uses this AI screening tool. And so what Mobley is arguing is that this AI tool is disadvantaged him and other job seekers who were over 40 years old because he was rejected every single time. And so he's arguing that it's having this tendency to remove older workers from the applicant pool. It's just not even giving them a chance or considering them, which would violate the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. That's the federal law. If this was, brought in California, it would be the Fair Employment Housing Act, FEHA. So this lawsuit is now a collective action lawsuit, meaning it's not just one plaintiff, right? It could be hundreds or even thousands of plaintiffs. And it provides insight into the risks of using AI tools in recruitment or for making employment-related decisions right now. So this is something that you're going to want to make sure that you take back to your team and you're thoughtful about. Another potential compliance risk area is involving the Fair Credit Reporting Act and California consumer protection laws. So I first just want to give you a little refresher on what the FCRA is and then why AI is kind of relevant to this discussion. So the FCRA is a federal law. It's been around for decades, since 1970. And what it requires is there's certain steps that you need to take before getting a consumer credit report from a third-party agency on one of your employees or applicants. In California, we're already limited in our ability to do that. We can't just run a credit history on any applicant that we want to. We would have to be able to show that they are in a managerial position or in a position that has access to certain sensitive information or financial authority. But sometimes employers do want to run a credit history check or financial report, for example. And so when you do that, you do have to give multiple detailed notices to that person that's going to be checked on, and also get their consent. Usually that's handled by the third party reporting agency, or stiff penalties apply. And recently, the federal agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they oversee the FCRA. They issued guidance suggesting that the FCRA covers third-party assessment tools used in hiring, such as AI screening tools. So what does all of this mean here? So let's say you're using an AI tool that maybe was developed by your vendor, right? You might not understand what information that AI tool is collecting about that person, right? If it's going onto the internet and looking at their credit history, their social media page, their conviction history, right? Then we could end up risking an FCRA or California Consumer Protection lawsuit and penalties as well, or other claims of privacy violations. And so again, we just really want to make sure that we're working with our vendors to understand how these AI tools work prior to use. If you don't have your own AI tool that's been, worked on with a vendor, I probably wouldn't recommend going over to these, publicly available AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera, and trying to conduct some sort of background check into your applicants or your employees. I just wouldn't recommend it as the best idea given some of these heightened risk areas. All right, so that was our kind of heavy compliance section. And now we get a little bit into our kind of more interesting, I think, discussion on potential pitfalls if your staff is using AI and how we can kind of mitigate some of these risks when it comes to bias, confidentiality, misinformation, and deception. So starting off with bias, and we've already kind of covered this from the compliance perspective, but I wanted to just also talk about kind of why there might be bias with some of these AI tools and kind of what's happening there. And so on a very simple level, I am certainly not a tech expert, but on a very simple level, a lot of these large language models right now, the way that they work is that they run off of probability and statistics. So when they generate an answer, they are generating the most probable or statistically likely answer. And so they are pulling from information that they've been trained on or is available on the internet. And so that can end up reflecting historical or societal biases that are already kind of baked into that AI training data. And so, if there's kind of this, for example, general assumption that older workers might retire soon or maybe have more medical issues, right? The AI might pick up on that inadvertently and decide that that's not a candidate that they want, just giving, kind of one example. So kind of worst case, that can unintentionally lead to discrimination in employment decisions and create a risk for us. But also, there's a lot of frustration out there right now with job applicants reporting that it's very difficult to even get to the interview part of the job application process in a lot of industries. And a lot of them have this sense that it's because these AI tools are being used. And, it's hard to say whether that's true or not, but I think there is something to be said about if we're using kind of these AI algorithms that require candidates to check all of the boxes, we could end up overlooking or excluding promising candidates just because they don't check all the boxes, right? So if you had a human recruiter, for example, they might notice that someone doesn't meet the qualifications of the job, but they have other talents that they could be served in a different role, right? That you hadn't even considered. Or sometimes they say, this person's so impressive in other ways, we want to create a position for them, right? And if we're using an AI algorithm, it's just going to be a little less likely, I think, that those organic experiences are kind of happening. So again, you'll want to decide, what level of human review and oversight do you still want in this process to kind of reduce those risks of bias. So to mitigate, what we'd recommend is you're not relying solely on AI for employment decisions, right? You're conducting that anti-bias testing when possible, maybe working with legal counsel on that, and just take some of that, hold on to some of that control, right? Make sure you're maintaining some level of human review and oversight. All right, the next big pitfall or risk is inaccurate information. So for those of us who have played around with these AI tools, you might know that it's not always accurate. And sometimes if you go to different AI tools, they might give you completely different answers, right? So again, they're kind of just working off of probability and statistics and how the question is asked. And so it can end up generating incorrect or outdated information if it wasn't trained on something that, recently happened in the world or it's not available on the internet, right? And there's what's known as, there's a term for it, AI hallucination. So they can actually fabricate citations or completely make up facts that are just not real. And we've seen that be an issue in some court cases with attorneys submitting briefs with just complete fake case citations. They didn't bother to look into if it was a real case cite. And obviously the judges haven't been too happy with that and have sanctioned some attorneys for doing that, right? Another issue is it could be missing necessary context from the user. So, if you're an HR person and you go and ask kind of just a general HR question, can we terminate this person? And the AI tool might come back with an analysis on at-will employment, and you didn't happen to tell the AI tool that this person has a very specific contract or they fall under a collective bargaining agreement or something like that, right? Then we might get an answer that looks really pretty and polished, but it's misleading. Also, it doesn't know what it doesn't know, right? So information that isn't available on the internet or not available in its training data, and a lot of emotional intelligence that we have as humans with our experience, right? The AI just really can't replicate that. And another thing right now with the current technology, it can't problem solve. So even if it feels like it's problem solving, it doesn't have any common sense reasoning or original creativity. So a human could have a completely original idea, right? And AI is always pulling it from something else. So how do we mitigate this? For our staff that is using AI, we want to provide them some level of training on some of the do's and don'ts. And so we really want to caution them that AI drafts should really be viewed as just that, a draft or a starting point, and make sure that they understand that it's their responsibility to verify the information with reliable sources, right? That they need to go and click on the sources that are cited by the AI, right? And investigate, is, that really the truth, what this AI is telling me? And for more complex issues where there's a lot of nuance, right? So legal issues, financial issues, tax, we're always going to want to make sure that they understand that a subject matter expert needs to review the content in those situations. So I wanted to just give a really quick example of incorrect information that ChatGPT gave me. So I was researching an HR question, and I said, what should an employer do if they used an expired version of the Form I-9? And it gave me this quote from the USCIS. It said, USCIS guidance says they need to complete a new Form I-9 and attach a signed and dated written explanation. And I had never seen this quote before directly from USCIS. This is kind of the best practice, right, to do a new Form I-9 and attach it to the old one, but I just had not seen that quote. So then I followed up and asked the AI, can you show me the document and page number, or can you link to that site, right? And then it came back and said that it could not locate the quote in official guidance, which means the statement it gave was not supported by a specific source, and the quote itself appears to have been fabricated. So this is an example of AI hallucination. It happens all the time in everyday use. And so we just need to make sure that our employees are aware of that and they're not overly confident in just trusting, the first answer that they get from the tool. All right, another risk area is misuse and deception. And this could be misuse by our employees, but also third parties, right, can create misleading or deceptive communications. We've all seen some of those email scams that go on where they ask you to provide, banking information or go purchase gift cards and those kind of things. And a lot of the times we can spot those. But as AI starts to become more sophisticated, those risks become, even more elevated. And so we want to make sure that we have some level of training with our employees that they can identify some of those types of scam or fraud that might occur. AI can be really good at generating fake photographs, videos, people's voices, unfortunately, and documents. So there's going to be that, especially if it's an email that's coming outside of our organization, just that extra layer of making sure that we really question it, or and if we're not sure, that they know that they have someone that they can go to confirm whether that is a legitimate communication. Also, AI can be used to harass or cause reputational harm. And so I think we're going to start to see more employment cases like this. Recently, there was this Carranza versus City of LA case where this LAPD captain alleged that someone had generated a fake nude photograph of her, probably using AI, and circulated it around the department. And she alleged the City of LA, basically didn't do anything about it. They didn't clarify that it wasn't this employee, that it was generated, right? And she ended up with a $4 million jury verdict. So that's kind of worst case scenario, but just to go show how these technologies may be used in the future. So what we would recommend to reduce some of those risks there is establishing a clear workplace AI use policy. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, and training your employees on some of these issues, as I mentioned, and then implement a review process for any AI generated external communications, right? So things that you put on your website or that you publish, your ads, right? Make sure that you have that human review involved. Another really big one is confidentiality and privacy. So if our employees go over, especially if they're using these publicly available tools like Claude, like ChatGPT, right? We need to make sure that they understand that they should not put any sort of confidential employee, customer data, trade secrets, sensitive business information, right? Legal questions, all of those things could have the potential to get leaked out. Courts have already also said too that the information can be used in a lawsuit or criminal investigation. And this one I really wanted to call attention to because it happened recently. So recently it was alleged that users on Reddit and X discovered that Claude conversations that had been shared. So if someone clicked share to send it to another person or to send it to their email, right, their discussion with Claude, those searches were unfortunately appearing in Google and Bing search results. So wow, imagine the level of just breach in privacy, right? That can happen with these tools. So it was alleged that resumes and business documents and many other things were appearing on Reddit that had been shared in Claude. So it's not to scare, right? Because these technologies have a lot of really amazing and cool uses. But again, we want to really train our team on some of the parameters. So make sure that they know that they should never input confidential or sensitive information into public AI tools. Address confidentiality and permitted AI uses directly in your handbook policies. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then train your employees on safe uses. All right, so now let's talk about developing your AI policy and helping to protect your business. And I want to launch our last little poll of the day here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, so do you have an AI policy in your employee handbook? Yes, no, we are working on it. So go ahead, give you a couple seconds, and then we'll share the results with the group. Right. All right, so it looks like 67% of you are saying no, you do not have one yet. And I think that's in line probably with the majority of employers. They just haven't got around to it, or they haven't thought of it yet. And maybe that's why you're here, right? To kind of find out, well, what should we put in our handbook? Some of you are working on it, and it looks like someone responded that yes, they do have an AI policy in their handbook. So it would be our recommendation if your employees if they regularly use a computer, if you think it's possible that they would access or want to access these tools in relation to their work, right? Then it's probably something you should consider. If you are, let's say, a landscaping business and you run all of the office admin work and the rest of your workers are landscapers and are not going to get on a computer, right? Then that might be a different story. Maybe you don't need that right now. But for most employers, we would recommend having a policy. And that's true even if you don't want your workers using AI for business purposes. If you don't tell them either way, right, then they're going to make their own assumption about what they can do. So you're going to want to clarify that. And then also it's getting difficult again, because if you go to Google and go to Bing, right, they have these AI answers come up. So we also might not be able to completely avoid it even if we want to. So let's talk about some of the key considerations. What do we want to have as part of our AI handbook policy? So first, I would just recommend defining what is artificial intelligence, or a definition of automated decision-making systems. And I would just give specific examples. So I would say these are large language models that include but are not limited to ChatGPT, Claude, Microsoft Copilot, so they understand what you're talking about. I think that's perfectly fine to just put a couple examples in there. Really importantly, what is allowed? So this you're going to have to give some thought to. So what's a permitted business use? So for example, maybe they can use it for research or for drafting, meeting agendas, right? But maybe you don't want your sales team drafting contracts using AI. You want that to go through your legal department, right? So I would again get fairly specific on what are some permitted business uses, what would be absolutely restricted or no. Who is allowed? You don't have to authorize everyone to use it. So you could authorize a specific group of employees or manager level. You could provide them a business email address, right, to log into these tools. Really important, what cannot go in, right? We want a very clear statement on sensitive personnel and customer data, trade secrets, business documents, or anything else that might apply to your business. I think it's helpful to make a note on work product, right? So again, that the employee is responsible for ensuring the quality and accuracy of their work and verifying the information and sources, right? That they understand they have to click out to the sources that are being cited by the AI to confirm that it's actually accurate. Some other key considerations, I would probably have a catch-all regarding policy violations, that these tools cannot be used for things like harassment, deception, fraud. That's probably already arguably covered in your other policies. If they were to do that, right, you could cite your other policies, but I think it's just a good idea to make sure to give them that reminder here. Another kind of important area too is privacy and property rights. So making sure employees understand that work generated by AI for business purposes is company property, right? They're working for you. It's on paid time, that's your property, whatever that AI tool generates. And reserve the right to monitor AI systems, especially if you're giving them a business email to log into, that you have the right to, log in and see, what the activity is in there. And then finally, I think it's also helpful to have an equal employment opportunity statement and just your commitment to not using AI or ADS in a discriminatory manner, just kind of in line with that Civil Rights Department regulation that we talked about. All right, so I'd like to leave you with a closing question or food for thought. And you can share in the chat if you've kind of been inspired today and there's a step you're going to take. So what one step are you prepared to take maybe starting this week when it comes to AI uses for your business? So some ideas that we gave you today is just having a conversation with your staff around AI, looking into potential AI tools that you might be able to use for your business or in HR, maybe auditing if you're using AI tools in hiring or to make employment decisions, making sure that those are compliant, or working on that AI handbook policy and training your staff on safe uses. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat if you were inspired today and you're going to take that next step. But with that, we can kind of get wrapped up here. So first, I just want to give, again, a big thanks to Monterey County Works for sponsoring this event today. And I want to remind you, if you do have any HR questions, they provide you that no-cost HR hotline. So that number is 888-217-6899. You can call that Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, and you will always get a live HR advisor. And then if you are interested in joining as a CEA member and getting some additional HR support, we have different levels of membership that may, tailor to what your needs are. So you can give us a call if you have more questions about that or visit our website. And now I will turn it back over to Anna to close us out today.
Yes, thank you, Gigi. Sorry for the little pause there. I was trying to pop something in the chat for you all. So I want to make sure before we get to this very important survey that you also know about. I did it at the beginning, but I want to make sure in case you logged on a little later that you had the link. The next webinar coming up is on September 2nd, and that's Hire Slow, Fire Fast. Again, this is compliments of Monterey County Works, especially for Monterey County employers. So we want to make sure that you have that information and that you're able to register and join us that day. And then as you see on the screen, there's a QR code, and I just dropped a link into the chat as well for you to share your feedback. So that's the way that we continue to bring you peace of mind to help serve you, is by hearing directly from you. So if you can click through to that, we would love to hear from you directly. And let's see, I don't see any outstanding questions, but if you are also here for continuing education credits, we have those on screen, and I'm dropping those into the chat as well. So your HRCI code today is 748791. SHRM code is 26-PDFHH. You can always email us at ceainfo@employers.org or call into your Monterey hotline if you need some guidance on redeeming those codes for credit for joining us live today. I do want to thank Laura and your team over at Monterey County Works for everything you do for how many credits? That is 1 credit each for the 60 minutes that we had today. So that'll be 1 credit towards your recertification on both SHRM and HRCI, whichever applies to your situation. So again, thank you to Laura at Monterey County Works for all that you do. I know that they have a job fair today, so if you're in town and you are interested or want to participate, definitely check out that event. But otherwise, we'll see you all on September 2nd again for the next training. And thank you again, Juliana, for sharing your time and expertise. And thank you all for taking time out of your morning to spend training with us. So we'll see you again soon, and look for an email from me with that PDF of today's slide deck. All right, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.